Hello and welcome to the Axiom Insights podcast. I'm Scott Rutherford. This podcast focuses on driving organizational performance through learning. Today we're talking about building a learning culture. There's been an ongoing conversation and focus on the learning culture of organizations for at least the past decade, and there are many articles over that time which talk about the connection between a culture that supports individual learners' interest in learning and connects that with the mission and goals of the organization. And over the past few years, we've seen some statistics which suggest a learning culture is at least correlated with business performance. A study released by Deloitte, for instance, found that companies with a strong learning culture, or in other words, high-performing learning organizations, are 58% more likely to be prepared to meet future demand, have 37% greater employee productivity, and are 92% more likely to innovate compared with other companies. And I'll include a link to a few supporting articles in the episode notes for this episode at axiomlearningsolutions/podcast. So today's conversation looks at building a learning culture through the experience and guidance of Rachel Horwitz, the Global Director of Learning and Development at Convatec. Convatec is a global medical devices and technologies company, and as we touch on, part of Rachel's challenge was developing learning that both met the legal and regulatory requirements for training, but also overcame the learner engagement challenges that are often seen, especially with compliance training. Well, Rachel, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thanks for talking with us today. I wonder if you could just give us some background of your experience in learning, sort of how long have you been in your role at Convatec? How did you get there? And what did it look like when you walked in the door?
Sure. So I've been with Convatec for 3 years, and a little over 3 years, and I took the role exactly to build a learning and development function. Prior to Convatec, I spent quite a few years at Mars, M&M Mars, and I had led global instructional design, that I led learning and development for digital transformation. So I'd gotten a lot of different pieces under my belt, and this was an opportunity to own the entire function end to end and to build a function. So to answer your question, when I came into Convatec, I like to say that the idea of learning and development was for employees to complete their compliance training every year, and that was pretty much about it. In addition to that, I had come in at a time when we just completed our first engagement survey in years, and the learning and development area had gotten a negative percentage, if that's even possible. So it really wasn't there, which means that I had a nice blank space to work with. And in my first year, I'll pat myself on the back, the year we had done another engagement survey, and learning and development went up 17 percentage points, which was the highest out of all the areas. So I'd like to say that I've contributed, and that was just the first year. So we're still on our journey to building a learning culture. But that was what I got myself into, and it's been really rewarding.
So that starting point is probably not unfamiliar to other folks in medical devices, medical technologies, or other regulated fields where people look at learning as a baseline as compliance, just legal trouble. And so when you're starting from that perspective, I guess it's not surprising that people tend not to love that type of training.
Yes, that is true. We require in our heavily regulated environment about 12 hours of regulatory training a year. So not only does that not leave much room for development, but it also puts a little bit of a bad taste in people's mouths when they hear training and they equate it to that. And then they think, oh, another 2-hour long PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to have to click through and sign in a test. So, we didn't have, I came in, we had some face-to-face training. We didn't have any virtual instructor-led training. There wasn't any, e-learnings or animations or anything like that. So the concept of creating exciting, good learning was certainly number one on my priority list.
Yeah, so let's talk about that first year, because if you walk in the door and you're sort of facing maybe a reluctant audience and then a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of getting people engaged and excited about learning. So where did you just start understanding where the learners were coming from? Was it talking to stakeholders, or what was that process like?
Yeah, it was a little of both, or a lot of both. I think, I had to spend my first few months really going on a listening tour, and that included a 360 approach to listening. So, meeting with our executive leadership team to understand their journey and what they were looking for capability wise to build. I also had to take a peek into we did have a learning management system, so I had to take a peek into what was in existence, what were our learners actually seeing. But ultimately, it was talking to our learners, talking to our line managers to understand, what has there been experience, what's been their experience at Convatec, what has even been their experience outside of Convatec. So just to understand, where are we here in the scope of what learning means to people, and what does capability building mean? So I think you can't do it without really listening and observing. Also, I had an opportunity to go out with some of our sales folks and understand what it looked like on the front end of really what their environment is for learning. Because if for salespeople, for example, they're out in the field. They don't have a lot of time to sit behind a desk and do their learning. Similarly, manufacturing, which I didn't get to do because of COVID quickly coming upon that. But our manufacturing sites don't have access to technology. They don't have the ability to even take time off to go and learn. So really understanding the environment, the content, the capabilities that needed to be developed, and listening and gathering that from a variety of sources was the direction that I went in at first.
So that was the first year, sort of identifying those gaps and those needs, and that's something also that I think a lot of people will identify with is the challenge of trying to find the attention and time of people in frontline roles to take them off of the floor, whatever that floor is,
Right.
to engage in the learning material. So where did you take that? And this is probably year one and forward from there. What was the mix of solutions you came up with, and how did that come together?
Yeah. So, well, I will say that on top of all this, COVID actually was a benefit to me, and I'm not sure how many L&D people say that, but they may or they may not. I think it depends. But so I had gotten in the role very shortly before COVID, and what I did was I created, but before that, I wanted to put together a strategy, a future state of what learning could look like, and that included minimizing all of the different spend of learning that was out there, because there was a lot, whether it's consolidating vendors or consolidating programs and curriculum. Again, understanding what our senior leaders were looking for, the direction of the business. I came in at a time of transformation, so I seized upon that as one of the baselines of my strategy. Hey, we are a new organization. We have a new leadership team. We have a new operating model, a new vision and values. So what better to build your L&D strategy off of is new, like that. So really understanding, the direction of the company, how we were going to do that, the capabilities that we needed to build, and understand that from the senior leader perspective. And then the other piece was building the curriculum and building it in different ways that they hadn't experienced before. And that's why I say that COVID was my friend, because we didn't have a choice when we had to all of a sudden shift to virtual training, or even all of a sudden our salespeople actually did find themselves with a lot of time on their hands because they couldn't go in to see their clients. So myself and a group of the senior leaders, we met at the beginning of COVID. We met literally every day to figure out how are we addressing and developing our salespeople's skills while they're sitting at home with idle time. I feel like I'm a bit all over the place here.
No, I'm tracking. So you're talking about you're sort of seizing a moment of opportunity, and I like what you're saying about really building that alignment. Not only are you creating a vision for what learning needs to achieve, but selling that future vision. Not selling, maybe that's too strong a word, right. but making sure that's socialized to your peers and senior leadership, the C-suite, inclusive probably, to make sure that everyone understands this is where we're going.
Yes, exactly. This is where we're going and why, and why what was currently happening wasn't the way of the future, but what is learning of the future, and how are we going to what are the the clear steps I'm going to take to get us there? Because there were so many different challenges faced to get that learning culture. I mean, I also had to, I was fortunate enough to be able to build a team. I was also fortunate enough to have a budget, to be able to spend in a smart way. But I immediately seized upon opportunities. So one big thing was bringing in a content library, so that there was off-the-shelf content that was available at the point of need, very quickly for our leaders and for everyone within the organization. That was huge, because all of a sudden we went from zero content to probably too much curriculum, that we had to curate, but it was there, and all of a sudden our employees could take advantage of learning in a very quick and efficient way. So yeah, I had the benefit of building that vision with the senior leaders to bring them along on the journey.
So when we were talking, and of course we had a chat probably a couple of weeks ago before we sat down to record this today, but I like the way you described the learning culture. And I can't remember the term you used, whether it was pillars or areas, but could you talk us through sort of how you approach the whole of the elements of a learning culture and the pieces or pillars that go beneath that?
Yeah, and I did call it pillars, and this is what I use to bring everybody along on the journey. So I created 4 pillars, of learning and of creating a learning culture, and my strategy then was built off upon that. So the first pillar was, again, that senior leadership buy-in, partnership, sponsorship. I wanted them to know what I was doing, but I also wanted to leverage their expertise, because senior leaders love to teach and love to get involved, and a lot of them told me that. So I wanted to leverage their expertise. So that senior leader partnership. The next pillar was the curriculum itself. So how are we going to build learning initiatives, learning experiences that help to build those capabilities that we identified with senior leaders? So again, that's where the content library came from. I also brought in instructional designers, so that if the off-the-shelf content didn't make sense and didn't meet our needs, we could build some customized content to fill those gaps, and streamline the curriculum. The other pillar, third pillar, and there's 4 of them, the third pillar is around learning operations. So we had a learning management system. We had some processes in place, but we hadn't had them in place for this new organization. So we had to create learning processes, learning standards, governance, some ways that our stakeholders knew how to get to us and what that partnership looked like when they met with us, because that wasn't in place before. So that really learning operations piece was important. And then the last pillar is measurement. How do we measure all of this to make sure that we're impactful? And so I hired somebody focused on learning analytics, so we could measure the curriculum, measure capability building, measure the basic parts of learning analytics out of the operations. That takes a long time. That 4th pillar is not something that comes as easily as the rest. But those were how I felt like we were going to really define a learning culture at Convatec.
So that conceptual sort of structure, then, how long has that been in place? And I would imagine that the maintenance and evolution of that becomes a little bit cyclical. I don't know if it's been around long enough to really have gone full circuit a few times, but I would imagine that, as you develop systems and processes, that feeds measurement. You measure what you can gather with the data, and that drives your decisions on the content decisions you make, and that flows back upstream, right?
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, the pillars themselves, as a whole, the banner, if you will, of what a learning culture looks like, are similar, are going to stay. It's what's underneath that evolves. So, over these past 4 years, again, those pillars are the same. But, for example, we're going through an HR transformation. So this gives me an opportunity to leverage our L&D curriculum or capability building as it relates to HR transformation, manager skills, career pathways, things like that, talent development, succession planning. All of those then are those those capabilities and content pieces. And then to your point, as we're able to measure more and more, we make and tweak and assess along the way. We're actually now, as it relates to learning operations, we're going to be moving into a new learning management system. So what is that process to move towards a new learning management system? And what do we need? And again, I feel like all of the different pieces are interdependent to each other to help feed what we ultimately want to measure and what we want to say is our impact in L&D.
So can we talk about measurement a little bit more? Because I think that's fascinating. And you sort of alluded to it a second ago. It's probably the most difficult part of all of this is trying to get to the higher level measurement. So what have you been able to report back, and what's on your wish list?
Yeah. Yes, let's be real, because I think everybody talks about measurement. And I've actually been reflecting upon it myself, because there is the measurement, when a stakeholder comes to you and says, well, what's your ROI on L&D, or what are we going to measure with this program? I think my new approach is that we need to break it down to its pieces. So I can measure that, for example, we're able to measure that we have decreased the amount of content in our learning management system from 12,000 learning assets to 1,200. And I think that measures efficiency. We've been able to, demonstrate that the amount of hours that our employees have now spent in employee development pieces of our learning management system. So again, that demonstrates that there's more of a pull and desire for learning. One of the biggest pieces, I think, that is that next higher level of measurement is that in our LMS, we can measure that managers are able to assign or recommend learning to their employees. And for me, that shows that managers are more focused on development. So as we move up the chain of things. Now, ultimately, to your point, the longer term is that true ROI. Are we impacting the business? Have we been able to do that? And my wish list would be to be able to say that absolutely that piece of learning really drove revenue in the long term. But I'm looking at it more as the different pieces of the puzzle right now. And I'm taking that. So, the different projects that we've been involved in. Now, our new learning management system actually will be able to measure knowledge improvement and confidence, which will have a bigger direct, what's the word I'm looking for?
The direct influence or impact?
Influence or impact, yeah, on the actual capabilities and on the business. So, one example is safety stock. Where we want to change now a global process for managing safety stock. And I will be able to say that due to employees learning the process, building their knowledge increase, building their confidence, we'll be able to much more adequately manage safety stock. So I'm not on any illusion. I don't know if you want to hear, I'm not under any illusion that learning and development, is that direct impact, but it's those different pieces, I think, that are more important.
I was thinking of it too, and we have another episode in the podcast series talking about just measurement coming up soon. So this is on my mind lately, anyway. But one of the parts of your learning culture and those pillars that I like is especially if you look at it cyclically, you have measurement that sort of feeds back into that leadership alignment. Yes. And to me, there's the opportunity created there to say, well, do your leaders, do your peers? I'm sure everyone cares about ROI. I don't mean to be flippant, but is that the right language to be reporting back to their stakeholders, or what are they really? What keeps them up at night? Maybe a better way to put it. And then if you're talking about, well, we need to improve confidence and competence by this in this function period, this year over last or whatever. Maybe that's the metric that matters.
Yes. Such a good point. That's a really good point. And actually, that just reminded me, we have not created it, but we use the pyramid that actually outlines the KPI. So again, at that base level, how many people participated? At a more knowledge, what is the knowledge growth that you want? Ultimately, up to those business results. Now, one of the challenges that we face and I'm sure others, is that sometimes our subject matter experts aren't so clear themselves. Um, and so therefore, you kind of, it's sometimes that measurement is a moving target, but I so agree with you. It's, let's get really clear on what matters to the stakeholders, and ROI is, a pie in the sky type approach versus something that's maybe a real clear KPI.
You mentioned that you had curated down, if I'm remembering the number you said, 12,000 content pieces to 1,200. So a 1 in 10 reduction.
Yes.
Which is pretty profound. How did you approach that and make the decisions about what was in, what was out? How did you work your way through that curation and consolidation process?
The good news is nobody had been looking at what had been going in or out or into it. So I'll say that into the learning management system. So therefore, it was pretty easy at our first go to look at, has anybody actually consumed this content in the past 2 years? So that was an easy. It's
so that
gone.
Becomes the first cut. Yeah.
Exactly. It is gone. And then the second piece is, so that made it kind of easy, I guess. But to your point, we wanted to work towards a much more simplified, micro learning, e-learning, or something that was more engaging. So if it was also old and very much, a 200-page PowerPoint that wasn't really following our new learning training guidelines that we put into place, that got cut as well. And our learning management system, and I'm finding out that a lot of companies are like this, also became a repository for things that are not learning. So that was a big change management, which I'm still managing, but we really had to make a decision and say, I'm making this up, sales incentive plans that your employees sign off on year over year. That's not training. That's no longer in our learning management system. So things like that really weren't learning, that also got cut. And then it came down to actually working with the owners of the content, our new L&D team, to understand, is this, I actually went out to, for example, our manufacturing team, and I said, here's what's in the LMS that's under manufacturing. What do you think? It's staying? Is it going? Is it aligned with your? Is it old? Because I don't know. But I really had to go to the stakeholders and have them help make those decisions. Here are our guidelines of standards of what good looks like. If it doesn't meet it, are you going to update it, cut it, remove it, or make it gone? Is really, so we were ruthless. I'll just say that, ruthless.
Part of that also, I would assume, especially if you're working with folks who are on the floor managing the learner populations, is okay, well, how do you fit that into the flow of work? How do you deliver that in a way that makes sense and is possible to complete?
Right, exactly. And that was our, do you mean getting the stakeholders to be able to have the time to go to
well, the time is of course the first barrier to overcome. If you don't have the time, then it doesn't matter how pretty the training is, it's not going to happen, right?
Right. But that was, so we came up with this year or last year 10 training standards of what good looks like. So that was our leverage to be able to say, again, to your point, is it learning in the flow of work? Does it actually have a business goal and objective? Does it meet this, and this criteria? If not, it's out. But our number one actual guideline and standard/guideline is, does it have a current business objective? So that also really made us make the cut in a lot of ways. And it's an evolving document. It's what makes sense, again, based on where we are in our organization. I've done this before in previous organizations where L&D was much more mature, and that list of criteria would look very different. But this was a nice starting point for us that got us at least on the same page. So when we're talking with our stakeholders, we could have that conversation and whip it out. This is what good looks like. This is our expectations. What are we going to do to meet those expectations?
Yeah, and as something that I think a lot of other folks could model and tailor to their business specifics. It seems like it's a job aid for your job, frankly. I think
Yeah, exactly.
in its own way.
Which I like to do.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this internal alignment. I think having that scorecard to measure what good training looks like is very important. Is there an annual report, or how do you socialize your activities to the organization as a whole?
So we try to socialize these activities on a quarterly basis, give or take, depending on what's going on in the business with our priorities. But at least regularly, we do report on a lot of what I talked about before, such as the learning operations cleanup, or how we're doing against our standards, or what we've decided to measure. We do that on a quarterly basis, and we report it to our HR leadership team, who are typically our front line into the executive leadership team, because they're working with the global heads on a regular basis. So they're the first point. And then I do tend to have it when I have my semi-regular conversations with the executive team, so that they could see what it looks like specifically in their business units. So we do report on, again, consumption of content, training hours, but also projects that specifically maybe come out of their business units, or those that have taken advantage of our centralized projects, our product programs, such as our manager to leader program, or our new process development curriculum that we've worked on with R&D. So we really try to report as much as we can to keep them in the knowledge and awareness of what's happening.
What are you seeing in terms of learner engagement too? Because the ideal for a learning culture is not only the leadership endorsement, but it's the learner engagement and participation. So the push versus pull dynamic. Are you seeing? I think you alluded to a learning satisfaction measure. What was it after your first year that had shifted from the negative to the positive? Right.
Oh, yes.
Early on in the episode, but how's that trending now, and where do you see that going?
Well, we actually are in the midst of our next engagement survey right now. So in the next few weeks, I'll be able to tell you what I find. All joking aside, but I would say that we are still on the journey. There is definitely much more learner engagement, and we're seeing a lot more requests. So one example is this summer we published a first curriculum brochure, if you will. I guess you could call it a curriculum brochure of what's available. And we've seen tremendous uptake from that. So not only have we gotten great feedback that it's available, but we've been able to measure the before and after of people actually consuming the content that's been made available in that curriculum, as well as more anecdotal, in that people aren't always coming to us, well, what do you have available, and what's, I want to build this skill, and what's available. Instead, they now know where to go. So we've seen an uptake in people actually just going to the catalog, which I'll take that as a measurement of pull for learning versus pushing it out in a meaningful way.
The notion of a catalog as a simple tool speaks to the internal marketing of learning. At a very basic level, it's simply communicating out what's available and making that known. A catalog or a brochure is a very effective way to do that, I would think.
Yeah, again, it felt so basic to do it, but it was nice. Again, it gave me another opportunity to make some cuts in the learning management system. But it was also great to be able to take stock of knowing that the way that we had structured it was what was important to the business. So we have curriculum aligned with our values and behaviors, our high performance team's principles, some of the business capabilities that we're looking to build. And that's how we structured the catalog. So that was really nice, actually, a nice way to pull it all together and be able to see, wow, we've done a lot in these past 3 years.
My thanks to Rachel Horwitz. We'll share the 4 pillars of a learning culture that she described, along with links to a few articles on this topic on the episode page. You can find that at axiomlearningsolutions.com/podcast. This podcast is produced by Axiom Learning Solutions. Axiom is a learning services provider specializing in on-demand learning and development staff augmentation and also provides resources to support learning through content development, LMS administration, and leader development programs for staff at all levels, among other services. To learn more, visit axiomlearningsolutions.com. And thank you for listening to the Axiom Insights podcast.